The last few months have been really amazing at what we've seen in used car values and the used car market. So the question remains, how does this affect the average consumer, and is now a good time to buy? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hey, I'm Jonathan Sewell Sales at Mitchell Mazda, Mitchell Lincoln on the Boulevard in Enterprise, and today we're talking about used cars. I've had a couple of videos talking about this, and initially back in March and April, a lot of people were expecting just like a Carmageddon, just the values to drop below the floor, but we didn't really see that. We did initially, March, April, maybe down like 11%, I think, where the values were in April, but then May rebounded with 9%, then June was up, then July was up. A matter of fact, June and July, when you look at this Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index, June and July were actually the best ever, if you want to call it that, or the highest ever values, breaking records. You know, I'm in the business to stock used cars, to find specific cars for my clients. And so I don't know that I'd call it the best ever, because having to buy those vehicles and pay sometimes overinflated, close to ridiculous values for cars, I don't know that's the best, would be the word there, but definitely the highest. As you can see, these last 2 points here are June and July as we sit in, and even from that dramatic drop down here, you can see March was down, April, May, June, July on this. So these two values are the highest that the index since 1995 on this graph has ever seen. What that means in this value index from Manheim is that dealers like me sourcing these used cars are paying the highest values, the highest amount ever for used cars. So the question for you is, now a good time to buy a used car? Or what do these values mean to me? So I just wanted to take a quick couple of minutes and talk about this. Let's just back up a second and talk about how we found ourselves in this situation. We all are familiar with the coronavirus pandemic and how it's affected our lives, and hopefully still social distancing and keeping ourselves and our families safe. And I wish you and your family the best health moving forward. Back March, all this happened. We all went under quarantine for the most part. Everybody went social distant or dark. Factories shut down. So of those days supply availability of new cars dramatically decreased there in the span of 30 to 45 days because they weren't building anymore to help get more to dealerships. And also even the vehicles that were already assembled could not come to the dealerships because the transport companies weren't working as well. Dealers, if you may have noticed driving up and down your town, that dealers in the USA, and I'm sure in other places, have been affected where limited new and used vehicles, but new vehicles because of these factory shutdowns. And we are just now starting to see those vehicles start to come. And matter of fact, this month and last month, as far as Mazda, we started to have some ships come in from Japan and get some inventory, some secondary inventory to its dealers. Lincoln, of course, is doing the same thing. Plants are back up and going. A matter of fact, Mazda, I just saw last week or the week before that they are now back to full capacity. So we're still having some issues there with social distancing and things like that to get these plants up and running. So what happens in a supply and demand economy is when the supply goes down, the demand is up, right? That's how that seesaw works. So of course, we may have seen new car sales drop in March or April, but people that usually buy in March or April, or maybe it's been a couple of years or whatever the situation is, they came out in May and June and July and started buying. So that supply was already low, then it gets lower. New car dealers or new car franchises have to supplement their lack of new car sales with more used car sales. So just taking the trade-ins and occasionally buying a handful of cars isn't going to work to stock on those values. You have people from the Northeast having to buy in the Southeast, people in the Midwest having to buy from the Northeast, and just all these other things, trying to make sure that everybody's stocked to the levels that they are the best they can. And so when dealer A, dealer B, dealer C is bidding on one car, we're paying higher and higher values to get those vehicles, especially if they're clean, low mileage, used car, year or two old, things like that, as close to new as possible, trying to supplement those new inventories. So we see this in Manheim and other auctions where vehicles just keep going up, up, up. Even the off-lease vehicles that are maybe 3 or 4 years old, available to each manufacturer, through each manufacturer and each manufacturer's finance company, we're having to pay high values for those because they're looking at the market as their basis on what that vehicle should be worth. In some cases, what we have to pay for a leased vehicle now is higher than what the customer could have bought it for with their original contract for the lease-in value. And if you don't understand leasing so much, I did just publish a lease versus buy, which will be up in the cards. Actually, it'll be on this side probably. So check that out and find out some more information about leasing. But because of the market right now, if you're actually coming out of a lease, it may be the best decision to buy it, or you might actually have equity if you traded it in, because we're trying to get the most cars we can. Now we're caught up to speed. It's August. We still are trying to buy as many cars as we can, trade for as many cars as we can. So with these high values, what does this mean to you as a consumer? Is it a good time to buy a used car? Okay, now I'm gonna take my shirt and set it aside. I'm gonna speak here as a person just looking at the market. Number one, before you ever buy a car, you need to make sure that you have stable income employment, which leads to income, to afford that vehicle. So don't go out and just buy a car because you like it. Make sure that you can afford it, right? Whether that's financing or paying cash or whatever the situation is. Number two, don't go out and buy a car just because you think that you need something to spend your money on, or you think that you want to have fun, or whatever the case is. I'm not against emotional buying because I do it a lot in my personal life with a lot of toys and technology. But I would say that right now there's other things more important than necessarily jumping right out there to buy a car just because you haven't been able to spend your money or buy anything in a while, and you just got back to work and maybe got a little money in your pocket or whatever the situation is. All right, so speaking specifically about the value of used cars, okay, I am in the business to sell cars, but I'm going to try to look at this objectively as a consumer. So if I needed a car, if it was time, my normal cycle to buy a car, I would consider a car. Anytime you go to buy a used car, you're going to be paying what the market dictates. Whether the market is down, whether the market is up, whatever the situation is, whenever you buy a used vehicle, you're going to be paying what the market dictates. So if the market happens to be up, and I think it was Evans.com that said that like large trucks or full-size trucks are up like $2,300 over this time last year. So $2,300 is $50 to $60 a month, depending on terms. So if you are looking to buy a vehicle and can afford $50 to $60 more for the new truck, or the used truck in this case, but the new to you truck, then you should buy the car. If it's going to put you under stress financially, you should not buy the vehicle. That doesn't change, okay? Now, you are always looking for a good deal. I understand that. I'm looking for a good deal when I buy things. Is the highest price of a used car a good deal? It depends on your definition of a good deal. It could be if you are upgrading to something that you need, something that you want, something that's going to be better for you or your family or your business or whatever the situation is. Again, go back to number one, can you afford it? Do you have stable income? Things like that. You got to double check that, especially right now. If you are in a situation where your job is still shaky, or maybe you just got back to work, maybe you were furloughed, whatever the situation is, probably not the best thing to run out there and buy a vehicle. There are, I believe, still programs in place. There was for several months. If you're starting to see that you're without income, you can contact your finance company and get protected or at least assisted during this time. So do that instead of thinking about trading. So the highest used vehicle values ever. Should you buy? Again, there's some conditions there. I would say, again, if it's time for you to buy, if there's something going to dramatically change, yes, by all means. Do I have a problem with friends of mine and family of mine that are wanting to buy a used car? I don't, but my thinking has changed. Okay, so naturally, in some cases, people want to buy a 3 or 4 year old car. That would be a 2017. That would be vehicles coming off lease. Well, if the off-lease vehicle, because it's 2 or 3 years old, is bringing almost as much money as a 1 year old vehicle, I'm going to focus my efforts on helping them buy the 1 year old vehicle if it's a difference of $20 or $30 a month or a couple of $1,000s or whatever the situation is. Sometimes these vehicles that are 3 years old with low mileage off lease or whatever the situation is, because of that 3 year old mentality, people say, oh, I can get savings on that. You may not be getting savings on that right now. So you have to be smart when you're looking at these vehicles, and you have to make sure, check several years, check quality, condition, all those things, because you may be able, in the case of most rental car companies that are turning in 2019s or getting those on the market, you may be able to get a 2019 with 30 or 40,000 miles, which I know is a lot of miles for 1 year, but you may be able to pay for that 2019 with 30 or 40,000 miles as much within $1,000 or $2 as a 2017 with 30 or 40,000 miles. So again, you just have to make whatever the best decision for you. I would say I would always try to buy the newer vehicle, even if the mileage seems high. Okay, because odds are if it's a 17 with 30 or 40,000 miles, you're not going to have as much safety technology. You're not going to have as much actual technology as far as infotainment and things like that. And it's going to have 3 years of age on everything, even if the tires are brand new. And even if the 19 has tires that are now worn out, you're going to have to replace tires, one way or the other at some point. But you still have an older vehicle versus a newer vehicle. So a couple things to consider there. Also, if you are, this is our second main topic. Instead of just buying, now is a good time to sell any extra cars that you have. Or if you're looking at buying, now is a good time to trade in a car. Because if you know the history on it, if it's one owner, two owner, whatever the situation is when you purchased it, if you have the service history, if you know the story, you can actually get a good value on trade from the dealership. Not uncommon as every situation. However, we are paying the most for trades that we've ever paid, because of course this is reflected in all the guides that we look at. Now, some of them are more responsive or reactive than other guides. Some of them are a little bit slower to maybe take 2 or 3 months, whereas some of them are changed every week. But we see what these cars are bringing at auction, and if we can't buy them there or have to pay X amount of dollars, we're willing to pay you X amount of dollars, or whatever the situation is. And it's here tangible instead of us seeing it just virtually, or not being able to actually go physically to the auction because of distance or whatever the situation is to walk the cars. We may only be looking at it online, whereas yours is right here in front of us. So it is a good time to buy if you're in that situation and it won't put you in a financial strain. It also is a good time to trade your vehicle to get a higher value. So even though you purchased that vehicle 2 or 3 years ago, or even though you have been financing that for 2 or 3 years, none of that's changed, right? You still have the same interest, the same principal stuff that you've been paying, the same amortization, but now that vehicle may be the most you can ever get for that vehicle if you traded it in. So a couple things to think of. Even if you're paying more for a used car, but you're getting more for your trade, it may still be a viable option for you. It all comes down to how it fits your budget, your finances, and if you still have steady employment and steady income. Moving forward, to sum all this up, we are going to continue to have a vehicle shortage. Yes, new vehicles are coming around, but in my case, vehicles come in, they go out. Used vehicles, new vehicles, there's still a lot of buyers out there. A lot of consumers are buying cars. I've heard it called a seller's market right now. You may be familiar with that, and we see it a lot with houses, whether there's more sellers or more buyers. You can determine those two things. My personal opinion is that in the car business, it's always a buyer's market because I have to have you agree to buy my car. I just can't sell it, and it's just not going to trip over itself. Now, of course, I would always do your due diligence as a consumer and make sure that you're happy with the place you're doing business with. Don't necessarily, you may have to be flexible on the type of car you want or the colors that you want or the equipment or mileage, because you may at some places have to pay a premium to get those things, whereas you can save a little bit more if you change color or go with a little more miles or whatever the situation was. About like the discussion of the 2017 with X amount of miles or the 2019 with X amount of miles. Same mileage, older or newer vehicle. New vehicle for about the same money. So you just have to look at these things and figure that out. I think it's a buyer's market because we always try to work the deal out on the buyer's terms, the consumer's terms, because if it's not comfortable to you, you won't buy it. That's true. So that's what we have to look out for. Or that's what we are trying to market to, and things like that, to make sure that we have the vehicles that you want and the deals that you want. Yes, I'm having to pay more for cars. We're paying more for trades. We're trying to buy more vehicles off the street. However we can get these vehicles to have the inventory for our clients and the ones that are coming in. What's going to happen next year? I can't really predict the future that far. Although I could see in March and April that used car values were going to continue to go up, but I don't know what's going to happen next year. Are we going to be able to supplement this market enough, the used vehicles specifically, to see prices somewhat level off? I'm not sure. They haven't leveled off any thus far, and it's still very tough to get the amount of vehicles that we would like to have. So that when people come to the lot, they can have a variety of vehicles. It's very, very hard right now. The used vehicle market is at an all-time high as far as value cost. Dealers are paying more for those vehicles than they ever have. So if theoretically then, or if you go to buy a vehicle right now, you may pay more for it than you would have the same car last year. So you may be paying the most you've ever paid for a used car, if not in dollars and cents, but based on its value. The good thing is that if you have a trade-in, you're probably getting more for your trade than you would have got 6-8 months ago, which is usually the reverse of what we're accustomed to. Usually the longer you have a used vehicle, the less it's worth. However, now it's actually worth more than it was 4 or 5 months ago. So there's a couple of goods, a couple of bads. The end result is to do what's best for you. One thing that I will mention is it may be a good time, if you're looking for a new vehicle, it may be a good time just to lease a new vehicle if you can find what you're looking for, because there are still some good lease incentives available. We're in that 2020 to 2021 changeover. You might get a 2020, lease it for 3 years, then you don't necessarily have any strings attached as far as 3 years from now you could walk away from the lease if the market's bad, instead of 3 years from now looking to trade your car, and who knows what the values will be at that point. And you don't want to find out that, if it goes the other way, that I paid way too much in 2020, and so now 3 years later I'm in a bad spot. So leasing may be a viable option, especially if you have a trade-in, because you'll reap the benefits of that higher trade-in value that can be applied as cap cost reductions on the lease, or to help lower that payment. So you might come out better all the way around. It's a different time, a little bit amazing to watch and see what these vehicles are doing at auction and what things are going in the market. Like I said, you might be in a situation where you bought a vehicle last year or two and you can actually make money on it this year if you sell it. That's an option. You actually could know that, hey, I've got a lower payment than I would if I went and traded. Keep it. Whatever works for you. I'm always here to answer any questions for you. I do think, just based on the supply, that prices are going to hold steady for the next month or so. But at this point, they're continually climbing. So we'll see how that goes. We will have the Manheim August mid-month out next week. So may do a follow-up or at least post a comment on this video depending on what happens there, so we can see how it continues to track. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another record breaker in August. I really don't expect things to taper off into the winter, which is usually when that season kind of dies down, aside from big year-end events and sales events. But if there's no new cars, it still may be a high used car market at that point. But I'm here for you. If I can answer any questions about the market or about buying a vehicle right now in 2020, used vehicles specifically, I'll be happy to answer any questions I can, and I try to respond to the comments as best I can as well. So thanks for joining me on this video. Give it a thumbs up if I gave you any good information, and or if you don't like any of this information at all, I can take a thumbs down, but I prefer the thumbs up. And as always, don't forget to click to subscribe so that you can be subscribed to my channel, and as always, ding that bell so that you're notified with everything Mazda and Lincoln and everything as it pertains to the car business moving forward. Thanks for joining me, and be safe.